You're listening to Confessions of a Counselor podcast. Here we will talk all things mental wellness.
Hi everyone, it's Janice here and welcome back to Confessions of a Counselor. Today I thought we would talk about the difference between empathy and sympathy and how this can impact our therapy experience. Perhaps you've had an experience with a counselor where you didn't feel heard or understood, and how this can also help us to build and breed connection in our personal lives, and how it can change the way that we show up in our relationships. So, as always, if we're talking about empathy, I'm going to draw your attention to Brené Brown. So anything that Brené talks about is so essential in the empathy conversation, as that's what she studies. There's a beautiful little video that you can watch, Empathy versus Sympathy by Brené Brown, that really talks about the essence of it, and it's quite adorable to watch. So I will leave that as a resource there for you. But when it comes to understanding empathy versus sympathy, I remember this conversation that my husband and I were having one day when I was learning about the difference between empathy and sympathy. We had a bus ride together, and we spent the time talking about the semantics of empathy versus sympathy and what that means, and is empathy more important than sympathy, or is sympathy actually what we want? And if I'm being really honest, I don't remember what the arguments were. But what was funny is that I remember feeling very connected to him in this conversation. And that is what empathy is about, is building connection. And so what was happening during this conversation, even though we weren't agreeing, is that we were listening to one another and we were connecting, and we were in dialogue with one another, which was building connection. And that is what's so important about empathy, is that we are taking the perspective of the other person, and we're allowing ourselves to understand and see that person for what they are. So we're recognizing emotion in them. We're communicating what it is that we're understanding from what they're sharing. And as best as possible, we're trying to stay out of judgment, right? So this isn't, oof, that sounds awful, or it's not about sentences that start with "at least." So Brené Brown talks about that in the video. This is really saying, I see you, I hear you, and it must be hard, and sitting with someone in their feelings versus kind of looking down on, or trying to stay disconnected from that person because the feeling feels too big or too scary. So this is a foundation for the therapeutic relationship, is that part of my job, or a therapist's job, is to sit in an empathy, right? To connect with you and feel those feelings together in a safe space where it's not about fixing, it's not about changing, it's about feeling those feelings, and then that's okay. So sometimes we might not connect with a counselor because their empathy doesn't land. Or sometimes a friendship or a close relationship might be very difficult because there isn't a lot of empathy there, and so there's no space for us to feel or experience what it is that we're feeling and experiencing. And so recognizing, where am I receiving empathy and where am I missing empathy? And this might lead us to building stronger connections with friends and family. It might lead us to asking for our needs to be met around empathy with someone else. And so when we start to understand that empathy is really deriving connection and having this place where it's okay to feel our feelings is so important. And so recognizing that is a big piece of relationship and being in relationship with someone. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Confessions of a Counselor podcast is available anywhere you like to listen to your podcast, both on Apple and Android. New episodes will be released every Friday. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to join the conversation. Leave a review or subscribe to the podcast hosted on the Anchor app. All these details can be found at janicelyons.com. Until next time, take care.